For more content revolving around the beauty industry or feminist media studies, check out the Substack, The Desktop Vanity, and if you like what you read, consider becoming a paid member to get access to exclusive podcast episodes, extended show notes, essays, and the full archive. Our lesson plan starts in 2003, where scriptwriter Elaine Bruce McKenna wrote a screenplay awarded for being a pivotal example of a chic corporate job, and that would be The Devil Wears Prada. According to the YouTube channel Lessons from a Screenplay, the first 10 pages of the script perfectly set up the characters and the world that is being built. In the first 3, we're introduced to our protagonist, Andy, not just who she is, but explicitly who she is not, which is a direct tie to the world she is about to enter. And then we are introduced to the montage. She is basically being depicted alongside of other women who developed a classical definition of what means to be a chic life. To add a little prelude, we are aware that chic cannot be purchased. Chic is taste, and taste has no budget, as it requires you to not be filthy rich. Either way, we see these definitions of Andy, and eventually within the few pages, we meet other characters like Emily Blunt's character that is meant to be the guiding force in the story, setting up the dramatic question, will she get the job? And the answer is answered when we're able to perfectly meet our antagonist, Miranda Priestley. There's a reason why I am not just talking about The Devil Wears Prada. I'm talking about the art and the storytelling. I want to demonstrate that the richness of this story is the perfect catalyst to the thesis I want to discuss today. What happened to the chic corporate jobs? In what we'll be asking, how do rom-coms in the workplace affect women's outcomes, well, in the corporate world? What if I told you that rom-coms that depict corporate life or work life for women can potentially perpetuate patriarchal mindsets on women in the workplace that go back all the way to the 40s and 50s? We'll discuss why that is, what it looks like, and most of all, how to mitigate that through mindset, choices, and developing our own personal identity in despite of this position. I once had a professor in my genders and intercultural communication classes that explicitly states every time at the beginning of every single semester that it is a true privilege to know oneself fully, in spite of what other people tell you you are supposed to be, which is what rom-coms I feel like really do a lot towards women and dictate to us what are supposedly the right choices in love and career. Hi, welcome back to a day later and a laundry load later as well. Let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room. What happened to those chic corporate jobs? And did they actually exist to begin with? And of course, why do rom-coms play such a role in the way work culture interacts with women? We'll also discuss if workplace rom-coms perpetuate limiting definitions of careerism and empowerment for women. I suggest that the form of empowerment we see in workplace rom-coms during the early 2000s is inherently limited because it's giving a more straightforward limitation of not just what is a chic corporate job, but what is a appropriate chic corporate job for a woman to supposedly have in order to be chic or the main character. And it entails this form of restriction of what it is meant to be. It also can misrepresent our capabilities and basically giving us more work in the end. And especially with the way we were taught the corporate world works, which first off, there's no one full written language of how to do that. We think that we will be treated that same way, but that is not always the case. Contrary to what people are saying about the job market, everything like that. Because let's face it, we don't actually have as accurate information as we should on the job market, if you catch my drift. But I'm a senior in university. I'm talking about being in my post-grad era. And genuine corner, authenticity corner, I'm scared because I'm also a communications major. And I noticed that comms majors get a lot of hate that I actually think this hatred or this basically this beating up that we give communication majors is inherently patriarchal in nature, and I will get to that point in a moment. When it comes to these corporate jobs, I argue that they never existed truly to begin with, because during the peak era of rom-coms, which was the 90s to early 2000s to the small sliver of the transition to the 2010s, we noticed that all of those years predating 2007, 2008 was peak rom-com time. Think 2 Weeks Notice. Think How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, The Devil Wears Prada. All these workplace-oriented romantic comedies. We as humans, financial analysts, and financial brokers have actually been predicting the 2008 crash since 2003, which was when The Devil Wears Prada was officially written. So, could we argue that maybe this was Hollywood's way of showing that society needs something to cope with the fact that we are losing the right to work since the dawn of the new century? Could it be possible that these were meant to be fictitious already, and instead just a fantasy that despite them being miserable in their very underpaid corporate jobs, they were at least having the right to work? So how do I think about this? I actually think that another sub theory could be that this is a form of escapism and another form of coping with the fact that we are lingering in the air knowing that something bad was going to happen soon. So we wanted to distract ourselves with these, entangled, romanticized work life plots, etc. And then we really got to a time when financial analysts and brokers and specialists and economists really just had to decide what was going to break the housing market or the job market. Congrats! It was both! Mila, I'm sorry, we're not going to Disneyland this year. Okay. I was very neurodivergent. I thought Disneyland was very overwhelming for me. So I was not as upset as the normal child would be. In the end, I will continuously discuss this theory as we have a systematic coping mechanism that Hollywood perpetuates in order for us to, like something in general. However, this will change soon because now I predict that we are going to start seeing a trend of rom-com realism, a new shift in how rom-coms or romantic comedies are being developed, produced, written, etc. And we'll get into that also within a moment. We will also discuss consistent examples like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, Confessions of a Shopaholic, 2 Weeks Notice, all those things, and how it has a specific depiction of women in the workplace that is innately patriarchal in nature. I call this the communication majors effect. See, I told you I'd get to it. I notice we see a lot of hate in modern day on how communication majors are. Everyone seems to think that it's a useless degree. However, really, guys, public speaking is really hard. It's actually the number one fear right behind death. Sometimes people prefer to die than to public speak. We have some type of skill. And we're noticing this cognitive dissonance with communication majors, keeping in mind that we're getting a lot of hate on both sides. Men and women are trashing communication majors. I have concluded from my general research and analysis that according to some anonymous sources like Reddit, people have the general assumption that it has to do with some form of emotional immaturity and the fact that communications, although not necessarily technical in a sense, for some people does not equate to skill. For some people, communication, since it's all soft skills, doesn't seem like it equates to actual technical skills. However, technology will always change and advance, and you will always need to have to relearn things. Communication is a field that is moderately finite to some extent. And therefore, these type of theories and analogies, and also these lessons that we learn, study guides, and skills will never go out of fashion, period. I do have a strange feeling that this hatred is innately gendered in nature. Why am I talking about this.com? Low key. Well, because a lot of so-called chic corporate jobs that are dominatingly represented by women in the workforce require a communications degree of some kind. Think about it. 2 Weeks Notice, a lot of pre-law people actually go to communications as their main degree before law. How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, she's a journalist. Devil Wears Prada, also journalism, also marketing, also PR. Confessions of a Shopaholic, a combination of both. All of it is communications base. And studies do show that in general, if we want to cherry pick, a lot of communication majors disproportionately are women. Now, does that mean we are not capable of being technical jobs? Does that mean that it's a segregated workforce? Absolutely not. Because when we try to heavily gender these things, we are innately ignoring the fact that back in the 60s and 70s and 40s and 50s, that
technology and mathematics and computer science was actually a woman-dominated space, to the point where we see the depiction in the biopic Hidden Figures that women, especially women of color, actually were responsible for putting a man on the moon. Period. For the longest time, there's so much evidence that computer science was a woman-dominated job because it basically had a really good direct pipeline from typing, which is something that also young women would have learned in school as well. Basically, there was a really good, easy transition. It wasn't until after the man went on the moon that men realized that they can actually commodify technology, make it marketable, make it available for everyone, basically make a profit off of it, and do it for capitalistic interests. That's when we started getting heavy advertising that segregated the tech market, making it sound like that tech consumers were only men. Therefore, inherently, with the cycle being produced and the people who were making these adverts, that only men made tech and bought tech. Therefore, we started seeing this very quickly when women started being depicted as not being tech savvy. Isn't it amazing how just that stuff can just be taken away from us because of rhetoric and a narrative built by marketing? Also, keeping in mind, the chic jobs that are depicted in these movies are targeted towards women, yet disproportionately in the film and entertainment industry, the people who make those big creative decisions, producer, director, writer, disproportionately are men. We now have realized that the amount of women directors is starting to shrink a little, and it's not growing as fast as it should. So basically, it's kind of a weird cognitive dissonance that I notice where despite these characters being women, they're not really always written by women, except for the case of Devil Wears Prada, because we did have a woman screenwriter. But once people realized that tech didn't have anything to do with politics anymore, it could exclusively not be for politics and instead can be for industry and capitalism, that's when those things started to change. And through this marketing, we created an implicit bias that pushed women out of the tech space that over time basically created the narrative that women were not tech savvy nor were dominating tech to begin with. I go through the phrase all the time. Sometimes men only need a century and a major. That's something I'll explain another time. And I'm expressing this because we are getting to the claims that affect us right now, where we're seeing in these scripts that the corporate jobs that are being depicted are a little restricting and what is supposed to be a chic or so-called appropriate corporate life for a woman. Publishing, PR, etc., sociable things, very sociable fields, interviewing, etc. This all rose back on the fact that there are common career opportunities for people who study communications in university that also happen to sometimes be depicted as hyper-feminine roles, while we're also pushing women into creating their more restricted view on what is a chic job to begin with, explicitly for women or feminine-presenting women in the workplace. According to the Pew Research Institute, collegefactual.com, and research.com, the majority of communications and media studies degree holders are women, up to at least a 70% ratio from everything and including journalism. It also doesn't change the fact that statistically, women post-grad are actually outperforming men. Guys, I am launching this podcast called Post-Grad Era. I already have one out. I recommend looking at the episode. It's all about being a soft landing for the ambitious girlies that don't have anything to show for it yet, and they're just filled with potential, and sometimes that is okay. Basically, some would say for the girls who get it, it's maybe all about being a work in progress. If you get that reference, please let me know. But yeah, the podcast is under the Desktop Vanity Substack. It's called Postgrad Era, and I talk about being a careerist woman full of self-care, self-improvement, and being authentic to you, and being full of potential and nothing to show for it yet. Someone would say it's perfect for the girls that are ambitious and a work in progress. Let's get back to the video. We are starting to actually dive deep into the collective cognitive dissonance between what is factually apparent through data and design. While against that, due to societal's dislike towards happy, successful women, we can't help but not compute a woman succeeding without romance. Explicitly, romance being a pivotal role in their life and their life choices. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a comms major, I will say. There's a lot of soft skills. Basically, the job is going to teach you how to do any job at all. But we learn a little bit from everything from conflict management to intercultural communications to different languages sometimes to media studies to research skills to interviewing skills, etc., writing, technical skills, and just generally how to communicate well and also in general how other people consume and digest information effectively. So, therefore, when we design our input and our output, we are able to communicate quite effectively. And I think this really reflects the assumption, yes, assumption, that women have been, in my opinion, groomed in society to be more sociable. Basically, it's more important for us to be liked, for us to be a team player, for us to be sociable than it is for men. Men have the capacity to be lone wolves, while women, there's more at stake for us for being lone wolves. We are taught to care more about what people think. So yes, I feel like we are easily depicted into these roles and we're easily being kind of brainwashed into these roles as we watch more and more rom-coms. And trust me, I love me some rom-coms. Need not to worry. I love rom-coms. And here's the thing is that if we do not fit into society and be sociable, there's more at risk for women. There's a lack of resources, there's a lack of protection, and there's just a lack of everything else that we need if we're in danger or we were in danger. It's also a lack of affluence, which everybody needs affluence in order to get around, in order to get their things together, in order for people to trust them, in order for people to respect them, etc. In romantic comedies, especially the workforce depicted romantic comedies, I see consistent patriarchal mindsets on women and their participation in work culture that drives all the way back to the 60s and 70s, where there was the assumption that women would go to university or enter the workforce just to network to meet their husbands and sequentially leave the workforce to be wives. And if we take the rose-colored lenses off and decide to think critically but yet optimistically, we can notice consistent patterns in women's decision-making in these pieces of media that really benefit men. Executing a systematic power structure that innately is teaching women to make decisions that seem to benefit them, but actually benefit the men in their lives instead. That's like choosing love over money, when innately you can technically choose both if you want to. And in this case, money in today's society for women equates to financial independence because financial abuse is a real thing and we will not want to disregard that. Choosing a man over the corporate job as seen in The Devil Wears Prada. She has a glow up, she found a bit of her passion, she grew as a person, and her partner did not want that growth. It wasn't about liking change. It was about not accepting the new her in this happiness. Also because, let's face it, she was starting to become a little out of his league, and your boy didn't like that. In the end, Andy was choosing love, setting the world on fire, and also choosing her kinda crappy friends, if you remember some key scenes. Hallmark movies are also a really good example, because a woman would end up leaving her chic, high-paying corporate job to go off and marry Santa Claus. To marry someone that only is employed once a year. One day, 124, generously 48 hours a year. I say in jest. We also see modern day examples of this through the movie Materialist, which is actually more of a cultural critique on the subject of rom-coms and these decisions, where our actual director and writer for that movie said that she didn't really want it to be a proper rom-com and instead wanted it to be commentary on a rom-com, which I think is fabulous. It's also showing the movement culturally that women are waking up, that we traditionally do not want the perpetuated stereotypes men put on us, and we especially do not want to make these decisions that are critical and sometimes harmful to our well-being. We also see the depiction of this shift in romance and culture through that very wildly over-talked about article in Vogue, Is Having a Boyfriend Embarrassing? We've beaten that horse to death. Let this be its funeral. Basically, it was a commentary piece on how the death of the public relationship was going away. As in, we didn't really want to have boyfriends anymore. We didn't want to get married, etc. And if we look at it statistically, men live longer when they're married because someone's supposedly nagging them to go to the doctor. While when women get into relationships, now we are getting pushed all of this invisible labor. We are now someone's mother and lover, and no one wants to be both, but it happens. And basically, our quality of life goes down. And despite men supposedly being providers, we're paying the price. So yeah, women don't really want to be in relationships anymore. It also has to do with a lot of social, economical, and political factors. Like, for example, in the US, we have been taking away the women's right to choose, women's right to birth control, health, information, etc. And innately, it is risky to be in a sexual or romantic relationship with someone when you do not have choice over your own body or autonomy. So that's one key example of social, economical, and political reasons of why women are not getting married, not being in relationships, etc. And the birth rate is down. Ha! I also say in jest. I think that these decision makings of choosing your supposed lover who doesn't want you to change, blah, 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 over the finances and over financial independence and that chic life is perpetuating a cycle of abuse where it's making us rely on men who perhaps do not want to provide to that capacity for us. That's why we're starting to see that women are waking up and we're seeing a transition that I might believe I consider rom-com realism. We see not just in previous works, commentary, Vogue articles, but also in movies that we are starting to have commentary suggestively discussing how women do not want those public relationships anymore, and women are happier being single, which is also statistically correct. What does rom-com realism look like? Well, now when rom-coms are being produced, they're no longer as well romanticized. Now we're starting to see them being produced in an intersectional lens, taking into account power and oppression and power and oppressive structures in our society, basically allowing for us to flip tropes on their head, allow for extra commentary, and allow for sometimes more healthier outcomes or at least life lessons, and having no longer a woman being told in past tense. We are no longer the cautionary tale or the one that got away or the girl next door, shifting that to now it's the man that is the cautionary tale. Question for the audience. Do you guys like rom-coms? What do you not? What do you don't like? And most importantly, are we kind of excited for the prediction of rom-com realism? Can you give any cool examples of rom-com realism? And do you think that that will be an actual thing? I do predict that rom-com realism will actually become a trend in movies and TV shows, etc. But yet we're seeing shows like Wuthering Heights that are coming up, but it's in quotation marks because the director says that it's such a dense book, you can't really, according to her, you can't really adapt it. So it's morely of it than anything else. We're seeing this dabbling in whimsy in romance to also realism in the sense of when it comes to what it means to be a woman, empowerment, what's at stake, and other forms of relationships. All I ask for my soft girl academics and academic sirens, my darlings, wake up, bestie. It is time to wake up. If you enjoyed this episode of the Desktop Vanity, consider reading my essay on what happened to chic corporate jobs and other notable mentions, like how the first JPEG was of a Playboy model, which is also going to be really interesting, the crisis of the winter arc, and amongst other great notable mentions as well, etc. Consider being a paid soft girl academic or a soft girl siren for exclusive essays, podcast episodes, limited web series, extended show notes, and study guides, monthly Zoom lectures and study sessions, and way more. To learn how to live your best life lately through self-care, storytelling, and intellectualism, please support the pages and the stack, and I hope to see you soon, bestie.